It's so fun to be in New York City. Yeah, 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 yeah. It's so good to be in New York City. Yeah, 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 yeah. It's so fun to be in New York City. Yeah, 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 yeah. Everybody hello, everyone. Welcome to Hardfire Media Liberal Conversations, a series of screen media programs we are doing to discuss current events and to help us get through this unique time of unprecedented state exercise of power in certain places. The idea for the series comes from classical liberalism, which is based on free speech, freedom of religion, and equal rights under law. These discussions are available on our Hardfire YouTube channel, where we have made around 50 shows at the Brick Arts Media House in downtown BK. The Brick Studio is closed right now since the man-made economic lockdown, so we're now producing programming independently. With me today, I've got Francisco Aldape. Hello, and John Clifton. Thank you for coming on the show. My name is Cameron Weber. I'm a political economist and historian and the producer of Hardfire Media. We have made about 10 of these independent programs since the national emergency of March 2020. I look forward to this one. This will be our February 2021 show on Brooklyn Free Speech Cable, available New York City wide. And we are looking for sponsors in other jurisdictions. So if anybody would like to sponsor our show where you live, Detroit, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Atlanta, or Minneapolis, or wherever, if you'd like to carry the show on your local cable, just let me know. So we're almost a year into a lockdown, which was supposed to last 3 weeks. The state never lets a good crisis go to waste. Today, we're going to discuss the idea of a single tax on land, one which I would assume replaces all other taxes and would include free trade to increase economic efficiency and individual sovereignty and well-being. This idea was originally proposed by American Henry George, so the idea is called Georgism. So Francisco, why don't you tell us why you're interested in this idea?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you, Cameron and John, for this opportunity. My interest in the work of Henry George, well, I like learning about the history of economic ideas, and it seems to me that, for instance, the work of Professor Edward Nell has when we were taking this class, he would mention the work of Henry George, and I think that for many it would be interesting to figure out in what ways those ideas form part of the tradition of institutional economics, right? So, and not only interest in the academic, but as you were mentioning, based on what's going on today, how feasible or useful some of these, taxing schemes might be helping us to get some sort of a more progressive economy.
Yeah, one of the ideas, both classical liberals and progressives, people who believe in a progressive taxation, like the idea of Georgism, because originally the usurper class was the landowners, right? So the wealthy tend to own more land, and so if you're taxing land, then you have a progressive tax. So John Clifton, tell us why you're interested in the idea of.
I'm interested in it largely from the point of view of someone who tries to look at matters, at least from a libertarian standpoint of free enterprise and true capitalism, true free market capitalism,
Mm-hmm.
and look upon Georgianism as a kind of mutation, that was meant to be libertarian, or at least framed as such, but more or less comes off, as a way of warmed over socialism. And at least socialism, as is sometimes said, doesn't try to say it's libertarian at the same time. But basically, Henry George and Georgists tend to think of themselves as good elitists, libertarians. In my view, that they can take a position that takes on the bad elitists, the land barons and yesteryear, and turn their system to benefit people, and call that system that they would be running or managing or promoting libertarian.
Yeah.
I don't think it is when we get into the mechanics of that, but I don't know if I'm overspeaking, but this is my perspective. It's not genuine libertarianism.
I've heard it called geo-libertarianism. So the idea behind the show comes from a person named Starchild in San Francisco, who's very active in the Libertarian Party in San Francisco. And John, you're the chairman of the Libertarian Party in Queens, right?
Well, no, I'm president of the Queens Libertarians, which used to be a chartered chapter of the Libertarian Party of New York, which is now the current chartered group is the Libertarian Party of Queens.
Yeah.
We decided to carry on because we feel like we didn't do anything wrong in the dispute that led to our.
There was a internecine dispute amongst the Queens Libertarians.
So we just continued the same second Saturday of the month meeting that we've always done since 1995. So our same set of people, our regulars and our regular slate of guests, along with some new guests, keep coming and speaking and exchanging ideas on liberty.
John's you can we'll put under your name how people can get a hold of you. So
Queens Libertarians,
exactly,
that's the web.
So I picked this book up, 50 Economic Classics. I picked this up, I think, in Australia. And so George is part of the top 50 thinkers, according to this person, Tom Butler Bowden. And I'll just read a quote. So the big book that Henry George wrote was called Progress and Poverty, 1879. So this is the quote that Butler Bowden finds the most relevant. What is necessary for the use of land is not its private ownership, but the security of its improvements. It is not necessary to say to a man, this land is yours, in order to induce him to cultivate or improve it. It is only necessary to say to him, whatever your labor or capital produces on this land shall be yours. So the idea is that the land is owned by everyone, but if you improve the conditions of the land, then that's yours to keep.
I'm not sure which one of us should respond first, but I don't see where that is a fundamental premise of a free approach to property or rights-related approach to property. I don't know where the premise comes from, leading to the conclusion that you just laid out of the summarized Georgianism. Where does this innate value of land come from that everybody shares? Are you saying, is someone saying the foundation of economic transactions when it comes to property and land is redistribution and the communal ownership instead of individual ownership? Do they even address that? In defending the Georgia's land and taxes.
I can answer that, John. So the idea is you're trying to encourage, and I'm not pro-Georgist. I just want to say that the whole idea is to get rid of all these hidden invisible taxes on everything, right? So you have, that's called the fiscal illusion. There's so many taxes on so many different things that you don't see what the tax is, what the actual cost of the state is. So people like myself who are fiscally conservative and socially liberal, we want to, you pay all your taxes on April 14 and then you vote on April 15, right? So the idea is to replace all of these invisible taxes, the fiscal illusion, and replace it with a single tax on land, which is evident, obvious, and clear. So the idea, right, you saw capital and labor. The idea is to encourage productive activity so you don't tax capital and labor, but you tax land, because land is the ultimate scarce resources from what I understand. Is that right? So you tax land instead of labor or capital. But these categories of labor and capital are false concepts anyway, because everyone's an entrepreneur. And then where it gets complicated. And I also wanted to mention, Francisco, did you want to step in for a second? You have to unmute yourself.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Good.
Go ahead. You were gonna say something.
Oh yeah. What I wanted to say, so I got interested in Henry George. I picked up this book, Critics of Henry George, from, I believe, Laissez-Faire Books. You remember Laissez-Faire Books, John?
Yes, it was very popular in the 90s and thereabouts, and it was publishing classics of economic libertarianism, and it was also a very good publisher from the kind of selections it deemed to publish.
Yeah.
I don't know why.
So in this book, I learned, as I was studying for this show, I learned that Frederick Hayek, and you'll see I've got a lot of Hayek books behind me. Frederick Hayek became interested in political economy because of Henry George. So, right. So that's
very good from economic in terms of political economy in general. There were a lot of good insights from George. Don't want to say I'm picking on him in totality. I just have a problem with this concept of his.
Right. So the idea, I mean, so right now we all live in New York. Star Child couldn't make it, but right now we've got we don't mention the name of current politicians on this show, but the current governor of New York now wants to tax sport or legalize and allow sporting bets, gambling on sport events, and also tax and legalize marijuana. So these are victimless crimes, right? So I call politicians taxaholics. It's not that they want to make gambling legal and marijuana legal because they're victimless crimes, right? Without a victim, there is no crime. They simply want the tax money, right? So it's just another form of taxing. So again, I'm not arguing for or against Henry George's single tax on land, but anything would be better than what we have now. So Francisco, you haven't said anything yet. Why don't you?
Well, yeah, no, I was wondering, what about because in my point of view is, for instance, how this idea of taxing land from Henry George can be similar to putting a tax on wealth, right? So given the problems that we've had in the recent decades or years, seems to me that even though it's difficult, as you say, to put a particular, so people working, this is the work that people have been doing, and I'm thinking about people like Milanovich, who's saying, well, wealthy people is not only between the case, we don't have the case that we have capitalists against workers, right? We have people who are actually working, who have a lot of money, and it's very difficult to disentangle these, class. Even though at the bottom, right? Class struggle, right?
Yeah, who
So,
wants to struggle all the time? Yeah, that's not a good way to couch stuff. Exactly.
but my opinion, I mean, I would be in favor of having a wealth taxing wealth. I mean, would that be something, for instance, that I don't know if some of you agree, or how that relates to having a wealth and uh, on this, with Henry George's idea of
Well, I can answer that. The problem with a wealth tax is that it chases money overseas. You put on a tax on wealth, you're not going to have any wealth. The wealth is going to be overseas. With land, it's hard to hide.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, no, that's a good point. Because so then that makes, in some ways, you're saying that if the wealth in the US is taxed fair or a more moderate rate, then capitalism is going to be shifting from the shores of the United States and going to other parts of the world.
Right. I'm saying now wealthy people are leaving the United States and have been for 10 years. They're going to Costa Rica, they're going to tax havens. Labor unions have their funds in overseas accounts with less taxes. Right. So a wealth tax would just simply chase people away from the United States. And the idea is to create wealth. The idea is not to destroy wealth, because rising tide raises all boats, right? Isn't that Adam Smith?
Yeah, but it's something that they. Well, go ahead, John.
John?
I was going to bring up the other part of this, the mechanics I mentioned, is who enforces and maintains this land tax, both from the point of view of containing it and in terms of how it's enforced and executed. In the first place, it's when you talk about having a single tax, this reminds me of those arguments about having one simple sales tax that would cover everything, and
Yeah.
we don't need for an income tax. Well, you can cut down a weed all you want, and look at it as hard as you can from that time forward. That's not going to stop it from growing back. And I wonder, where did you come up with the idea that you can come up with one tax applied to one area, wherever that is, in this case, a land tax, and not expect the people who want to go on being cash-sucking vampires of the public will not just say, oh, well, we can have this tax and we can have a new tax, or bring back an old tax to cover these other needs of society.
Right.
And then we go back into the argument again. We have this same syndrome happen all the time between the major political parties in this country, Republicans and Democrats. Republicans come in and often cut taxes back, or at least prune it back, but it's never really written in permanent law or anything. And the Democratic administration comes in come the new legislation or executive orders to re-raise the taxes. There's never a resolution to this.
And the
I think it's land tax.
The general public is a ping pong ball that gets batted back and forth. And that's called regime uncertainty. When you keep changing the rule of law, then you don't get onward investment. Yeah, like today, period.
The phrase I'm looking for is, we need to strike the root, and just get rid of the whole schema of legitimacy that taxation is given. It's legalized theft, and that's it. Basically, we don't need to have legalized theft in a free society. We can have other things, other kinds of fees that are actually for services that are actually popular, that the public wants. Government can charge fees for that, and you only need as much money to be going into the government as necessary, to preserve basic rights, and that's it. Nothing else. No more. No social agendas. Not any of that.
Exactly. So, John, you had mentioned before this idea that land being a common good. From what my understanding of Henry George, what that means is that, say you're a landowner, and then this public money pays for a road or a bridge or improvements, the general welfare, And then you as a landowner get benefits from those public investments that allow the value of your land to go up. So the idea is that the land value goes up due to public investments, but the private owner of the land gains value from those public investments. So the idea then, and this is where you get to the expert problem, which you keep alluding to, John, is who decides what the value of the land is? Who decides what the value is of the improvements on the land, right? So you have the land, which belongs to everyone, and then the improvements, which belong to the entrepreneur who make those improvements. Who decides how that's broken down, the value of the land based on the entrepreneur or based on the public investments? And so that gets then down to discretionary decision-making on the tax authority. And what's, so you think about that for a second, but then the other point is, we're only addressing the revenue side. We're not addressing the spending side in this discussion. And that's John's point. So those are the two things I want to add so far.
And before I lose the point here is that there is a concept called the managerial class, that if we allow a bunch of know-it-alls or experts who sometimes, okay, they have degrees, they have experience, they have a good understanding, they're well published, but the idea that a certain class of people should be running these things and making general presumptions about what has to be redistributed instead of looking at it case by case is quite problematic from the point of view of just following a libertarian train of thought, where you assume that people are individuals who are, in most cases, entirely responsible for their own wealth creation, and did not necessarily involve other sectors of government to obtain that wealth or maintain it or build it. There is pure free market capitalism, and then there's something called state capitalism, crony capitalism, where you have a bunch of a bunch of corporations or wealthy individuals, elites, deciding what benefits that they will get to hold on to, as opposed to many other people, and what kind of schema should exist, for taxing everybody else and managing the tax system. And I think that is what is implied by the Georgian system, that there's the way to put it is, I remember when Bill Clinton was running for president, he would always say, I have a plan for this and I have a plan for that. But when he gets in office, then he builds all these bureaucracies to deal with implementing his plan. So George is always talking about this idea, but he's not talking about the fact that it's going to require bureaucrats, it's going to require panels, it's going to require people to make these decisions about how to implement a single tax on land. And so it's like the nose is being brought in and justified by his reasoning, but the rest of the apparatus of the larger state that it would be required to run it is not talked about in Georgianism. Georgism, yeah. I don't know, I sort of drifted off there, but that's my basic issue there, is that it basically comes down to a disguised form of state capitalism or crony capitalism or elitist capitalism, where a bunch of small people burn everybody else.
And that's utilitarianism, that's what the utilitarians have always wanted, an elite, and everybody else follows the elite's rules. A philosopher friend of mine calls what John's talking about managerium, the managerium, the elite who are managing the tax authorities, the central bank, the IMF, World Bank, UN. All of these are elites, and that's the type of education you get in elite schools. Not just in the United States, but France, England, the United States. You go to one of these elite schools, and they teach you that you are supposed to be in charge. Do I have that wrong, Francisco?
Yeah, no, I think that I agree that there is a rigged economy. I think most of us have realized, and to the extent that But I mean, my understanding of the historical conditions before, the, when Adam Smith was writing and developing these ideas of the pin factory and competition between small, I think this is like the really the beginning, right? I mean, at least in my part, that version that Adam Smith portrayed probably existed, but when he was living. But then when we move through the 19th century, through the 20th century, we have what is called the monopoly capitalism, right? Which
Yeah.
can be referred to as state capitalism. But then, that also calls the question as to whether if we don't have the state, how are we going to deal with these issues of the pandemic? Let everybody on their own? you know?
We've called that, yeah, that's a good question. We've called that in prior shows, corporatism, where the state supports certain firms to the detriment of small business. Yeah.
Right. But you have I mean, at least in my mind, the state has to help not only big companies, but like the small individuals, because, well, they're being told that they cannot work, right?
Exactly.
So they have to do that. If not, the problem
So
that we have the last 4 years is going to be nothing compared to the next 50 years, right?
right. So believe it or not, we've already done 27 straight minutes of conversation about what the state should do about the pandemic. We'll have to leave for another time. So why doesn't everyone just say a last comment, and then we'll say call it a wrap. John, you got anything you want to add?
Okay. Yeah, well, I would say that there was the economist Walter Block once stated about Murray Rothbard that the things like Georgism conform to the Rothbard rule, which he said that people who are not fully invested in free enterprise philosophy tend to be specialists in things that they're the worst in. It is George was great on political economy in general, but what did he specialize in? The single tax on land. And there are other examples of that.
There are.
Murray,
Murray
Freeman, the same thing.
Yeah,
he conquered everything, but what did he specialize in? School vouchers, and he wasn't so hot on that. So,
exactly. That's a whole other topic. Francisco, any last word?
No, just to add on to what John was saying, and to one of your favorite economists, what Hayek used to say, right? That if you're only an economist, well, you're probably not going to be doing good economic work, right?
Yeah, if you're an economist only, you're not a good economist, right? So stop recording. And so thank you, everyone, for watching Hardfire Media Liberal Conversations. This is our February 2021 show. Also will be available on YouTube. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time. Thank you. Essential service.